Welcome to Reviews for Fun channel, and I invite you to a documentary showing the truth about KFC. In creating today's documentary, I have worked with dozens of different KFC employees, and they have told me literally everything about hygiene, about freshness of meat, about the scope of their duties, and most importantly about whether KFC's top-down, very exacting standards actually coincide with reality and practice. In addition to this, they have told me a few other secrets that I think may come as quite a surprise to you, but let's start with freshness of meat.
Chicken 3 times a week. There are deliveries. Chicken came from different suppliers through my career. There were more than 4 or 5 of them.
The restaurant also has frozen hen in stock, but it's just such a buffer that in case the fresh one goes too fast or can't take this product, so I made a frozen one but it's rarely used.
The chickens always came fresh from a local supplier. No, as it is in the ads, there were probably valid from what I remember 2 days, while the bites always came already marinated frozen.
KFC is a franchise company, and this means that only a small percentage of restaurants are actually run by the head office directly by KFC, and the vast majority of locals are run by private individuals under license from KFC. Opinions are divided, but mostly people write on the internet that the chickens are fresh and always from local supplier. But there are also a few people who said that they work in restaurants in specific establishments where these standards are observed to a slightly lesser extent.
The manager's job was to keep an eye on losses. Unfortunately, this meant that we did not throw away spoiled meat or salads, and then when we entered the refrigerator where the tomatoes or other vegetables that were past the deadline were kept, instead of throwing them away, we opened the product and put it into other containers so that it was not visible that they were past the deadline. When we entered the refrigerator where the meat was kept, we could smell as if something had died inside because the spoiled meat was not thrown away. We were not supposed to throw the meat away because it was a waste, but if someone threw it away, he had to explain to the manager why it was thrown away and why there was such a loss, because it was a big problem for the manager.
The issue of freshness of raw products is one thing. The other issue is the so-called secondary terms for products already prepared and ready to be served to the customer well, and in this aspect, the top-down standards of KFC are very strict.
If the chickens were not sold quickly after frying, they had to be thrown away. Strips had half an hour after frying. They had to be thrown away after that time. Wings 1.5 hours. Kentucky chicken also 1.5 hours. Sandwich meats like Zinger Grander after an hour, and after that time these meats had to be thrown away.
However, do employees really follow the prevailing rules of throwing away old meat after frying?
These rules exist only on paper, and only as it is audited meat that should be in the heating counter. Half an hour can be 2 hours, so you get into a sandwich or a bucket of dry chips and meat and ingredients that should really be thrown away by us, and so it happened that the man dragged it. But it's not like we made chicken again in the morning and in the evening we still sold it. Some pieces have, for example, 30 minutes, then those 10 minutes still attracted.
Employees had to keep track of the times that were printed out, and we threw away the old times and simply gave them a new time. The same with the fries. The fries can lay for 7 minutes and we have a timer, or we don't set the timer at all, or we nail it, that is, we click it a few times, and it came to the point that the fries are no longer so soft, they are no longer crispy, they just feel long. Well, unfortunately, because of the losses, that's how we did it.
Strips had pierced texture. They're 10 to 15 minutes, by which it gets dry and hard. Later there is a problem because people come with complaints that the chicken is too hard or too dry or not it looks appetizing.
While the vast majority of people said that the raw products are always fresh, in the case of secondary expiration dates the situation is quite different. In some restaurants repeated piercing of the time is the norm, and in others it is reserved only for exceptional circumstances and is used in moderation. Everything depends, of course, on the policy of a particular restaurant and the managers who manage it. The expiration date's primary and secondary usefulness is not everything. However, I also asked KFC employees about the issue of oil. Well, let's note that all types of chicken and fries, which is well most of the products served in KFC, are fried in deep oil. Well, its quality is quite important. I learned that the oil in fast food chains is very rarely changed, but it is filtered regularly.
3 chambers in a deep fryer are usually made. In this last chamber, every now and then in such a chamber you drain this oil, filters it, and back this oil goes up into the chamber.
In theory, chickens are fried in a different oil than French fries, but in practice too?
When there is no more oil in the machine because it is being filtered at the moment and we have an order and there is not enough meat when we need to have it fried, for lack of time the chef simply enters the fryer, puts the meat in the fryer basket and fries the meat in his meat where only the fries should be fried.
Well, that was rather against the top-down standards of KFC, but it turns out that fully legal and possibly even recommended as the so-called shortening.
The shortening was that the oil in the fries had to be of the best quality, which means that the oil was siphoned off from the fryers and poured into the machine where the chicken was prepared, because the oil on the chicken may not be of the best quality, but the oil on the fries must always be fresh, and if the oil on the fries is burnt, you can feel it immediately in the fries, because the oil is burnt.
But interestingly, in the case of chicken, it is also possible to detect with what oil the chicken was made darker with what it was made.
Once I even had a chicken that I had to pour fresh oil into the third chamber of the chamber where chickens are usually baked, and the chicken came out very light.
Employees also told me that it is not worth going to KFC after 10 p.m. because the kitchen is then switched to cleaning mode, not to frying new chicken, so there is a very high probability that you will just get the product from the shelf. Apparently it is even worse on Sunday.
What I saw on Sunday is the failure to follow all the rules and standards. I can't imagine that on Sundays it's so obvious that no one will come to inspect the place, so all the employees come in their private clothes without their hair pinned up, with their jewelry on their hands, and we make sandwiches in a normal way, and when it comes to expiration dates it's not printed at all, and for those more expensive sandwiches like Grinder or Singer it's recommended to add a big piece of meat, and we knew that the old meat wouldn't come off, so instead we broke it up into a few small pieces and just added what we have on the counter, some strips of bites, and poured it all into the sandwich. Then we sent it out to the customer. Of course, of late we've been getting some feedback and complaints, but what can you do when there's such pressure not to waste?
In all truth about gastronomy, the cooks told me that hygiene is sometimes tragic. Fortunately, with fast food the case is a bit different because these are multinationals guided by very screwed from the top standards, and what is interesting, most of the employees confirmed to me that indeed in terms of hygiene they have nothing to reproach KFC at all.
In that restaurant where I worked, it was very careful to wash your hands as often as possible so as not to touch your face, hair, so as not to pick something up off the ground and return to your post without washing your hands.
Employees wrote that even if something factory sealed falls on the floor, for example a sachet of ketchup or a bottle of water, they absolutely do not have the right to pick it up, and it goes to waste. Another issue is related to issues strictly connected with work in KFC. Because it turns out that there are quite a few different absurdities in KFC. There is a division into specific positions. So for example, people on the service desk receive orders, then coat and then fry the chicken. For example, people on the service receive and issue orders, in turn cooks in the kitchen prepare the chicken. And here's the interesting thing, they do it completely from scratch, that is, first marinate the chicken, then coat and then fry. Only that the problem in all this is that some employees are supposedly much more duties than it might appear from the contract.
It came to such situations with my shift. I was responsible for 3 positions on which I could not cope, so everything was in total chaos.
Some employees have complained that some KFC establishments not only do not respect the employee's time off, but also do not respect his or her working time. In KFC there is a special electronic system that very accurately records the working time of each employee. Well, the snag is that sometimes this system is used in quite an inappropriate manner.
People analyzed how much they worked and how much they got, and it turns out that something doesn't add up because we just sometimes put people on breaks that they don't have. A lot of people don't even go on these breaks because they don't have time for it, and the manager will put them on a 30-minute break. There is a little less money, and if he does so a few days a month, it's a few $100s less.
A well-known British YouTuber has entered into a business partnership with KFC in which he recorded a video in which he visits one of the chicken farms. In the video we see beautiful young energetic chickens. They are provided with fresh bedding of course and even special swings so that they can feel like in their wild natural environment, simply so that the chickens don't get bored. But sometime later on the exact same farm, a journalist sneaking secretly saw more than 50,000 chickens crowded on the spot. Shockingly, a large number of them are practically unable to move on their own and lie motionless on the ground. Chickens, instead of running on fresh bedding, lie motionless in their own feces. Some of them are already dead. They did not survive to the day of slaughter due to the conditions under which they were raised. Most of them are simply agonizing to death. But what exactly causes chickens to turn from vigorous and full of life to barely alive and emaciated? To understand this, we have to go back 80 years. The population of America began to grow very rapidly, and there was simply a problem with providing food for such a large number of people. So the authorities came up with a competition called Eye of Tomorrow, which was to determine the breed of chicken that would produce the most meat in the shortest time possible. At the same time, scientist Thomas Dukes was studying how different ingredients in feed affect the rate of growth of chickens. But in the same laboratory other research was also conducted. The greatest achievement of the scientists there was the patenting of a completely new antibiotic, much more effective than the existing penicillin. It is worth mentioning that it was developed exclusively for humans. Thomas, however, liked to experiment and decided to steal a bit of the antibiotic from the laboratory to add it experimentally to his feed, and the results exceeded his wildest expectations. It turned out that after 25 days a chicken fed with ordinary feed weighed 110 grams, and a chicken fed with feed with the antibiotic added after 25 days weighed more than 5 times as much as 277 grams. So, quite by accident, it turned out that the antibiotic can not only cure people from diseases but is also a growth promoter for decades to come. Breeders created so-called broiler chickens, called broilers, or chickens that are such a mixture, once fed such optimized feed and stuffed with such antibiotics to give as much meat and in the shortest possible time. The effect of this is that today's chickens raised for meat after 25 of their lives weigh more than 1,300 g. In natural conditions, a chicken after 25 days of life would weigh 10 times less. That is as if a 5-year-old child weighed 200 kilograms. So extremely rapid growth of chickens is artificial, as forced. Their bodies are adapted to carry about 10. As a result, after a few weeks of life, a large proportion of these chickens are simply not able to move on their own because they are far too heavy for their abilities. What is true is that they have on the farm drinkers and feed, but some of them are simply physically unable to, and that's why the British branch of KFC didn't invite an influencer at such a time when the chickens were only a few days old. They were still small, cute and energetic. In further weeks of breeding exactly the same chickens, in the following weeks the same chickens not only have problems standing on their own feet, but also sometimes get various metabolic diseases such as green muscle disease or so-called spaghetti meat. The chickens are killed after just over a month of life, while in the wild they can live up to 10 years. But that's not the worst part. The worst part is that some of these chickens can even live past that month. In KFC documents you can find a provision that says that the acceptable rate of death of chickens during rearing is about 5%. And this means that if we have about 52,000 chickens in one hull, then due to poor living conditions up to the time of slaughter may not live even 2,500 chickens.